Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's Wednesday, 27th of January, and this is show number 108, if I remember correctly. Yes, 108, just checking the numbers there. Right, good to see people this morning, as usual. I've got a fairly packed show for you. We'll be talking about a Cheshire bike dealer that have turned their showroom into a COVID vaccination centre. We'll be asking which is the UK city with the most bikers per head of population. We'll look at the government justifying the no theory test extension, and the DVSA are to relaunch key worker tests, but in a strictly limited fashion. An interesting story that's popped up is a fight between the French Cycling Federation and the French Motorcycle Federation over ebike titling. And we'll be looking at a better biking tip, understanding the constant bearing problem at junctions and roundabouts, which goes back to my tip on Tuesday yesterday. So stay with me for the next 30 minutes or so whilst I take you through all that. Okay, let's just get the photo that I wanted to show you up, if I can get the screen share to work. There we go. Pictures, there we are. So you should get that now. That is a bike dealer in Cheshire. A story got a lot of news coverage yesterday was that 300 researchers and staff working at the Francis Crick Institute in London, it's just near St Pancras Station, have volunteered to help out with the vaccination program. So the scientists and staff there are working on a voluntary basis, and it's a biomedical research centre, and what they've done is they set up a vaccination centre in what's normally their public exhibition hall, and most of the scientists will be fitting in shifts in the vaccination centre around their research. So it's all worthy stuff, but that hit the high headlines, of course. But I just wanted to give a shout out to a Cheshire motorcycle dealer who's done exactly the same. And what they've done is they've taken their showroom and transformed it into a vaccine centre to speed up the delivery of jabs. The 100-year-old Crew Honda Centre has divided itself in two, basically, to make room for the vaccination centre. Bikes are being serviced in one half of the dealership, but what they've done with the showroom there, as you can see, is they've provided it free of charge to the NHS for as long as needed to become a vaccination centre. The jabs themselves have been given by a team from the West Street Pharmacy, which is just across the road. The site began operation on Saturday the 23rd, and they administered 400 jabs over the weekend. And initially, the team plan on vaccinating around 1,200 local residents each week, and they ultimately hope to be able to roll that up to 2,000 jabs a week. The dealer principal, Roger Morris, said this all started when my very good friend Raj, who owns the chemists over the road, came across to see us taking the floor up. Next minute, he was saying, I could use this as a COVID vaccination centre. The NHS apparently offered to rent the building, but the dealership offered to donate the floor space for as long as it's needed. Mr. Morris says it's been an incredible transformation from a Honda motorcycle dealership to a COVID vaccination centre, and he offered his help to everybody or his thanks rather to everybody who's helped made it happen. He said it's not been easy, but it's amazing what can happen when everyone pulls together. And not surprisingly, there's been significant support for Crew Honda from the local community. So there we go. There's a good story for you to start the morning off. All right, so what else? Well, here's a little puzzler for you. Which location in the UK, which city has the most motorcycles? Well, if you count numbers in terms of built-up area, then the obvious answer is London. But if you do a count based on head of population with a bike in the UK's cities, and you get a rather different picture. And this data is actually from confused.com, the price comparison website, and it's based on Department of Transport numbers. And rather to my surprise, what they found was that Plymouth actually comes out as the biggest motorcycling city in the UK, with a total of 7,116 bikes, scooters and mopeds currently licensed in the city. And that equates to one bike for every 16 cars on the road in Plymouth, which is a fairly phenomenal ratio, actually. And it works out as 3 bikes licensed for every 100 people. These figures make it the most biker-concentrated city in the UK. In number 2 on the chart was Bristol, with 8,704 motorcycles. But as Bristol has a slightly bigger population than Plymouth, that drops it down to around 2 bikes per 100 people and 1 bike per 21 cars on the road, which is still a pretty impressive ratio. In third place was Peterborough, with 3,443 motorcycles licensed. Behind that, in fourth place, was Kingston upon Hull with 4,735, and a basic in both of these cities, the ratio is around 2 motorcycles per 100 people. So that's a slightly different way of looking at the bike numbers. Don't forget, if you've got any comments, any questions, any feedback, anything you want to know that I can help you out with, do drop me a line and I'll try to get back to you at the end of the show. I do also try to greet people as they drop in, and Cheryl's appeared this morning. Hello, Cheryl. Nice to chat to you again. Okay. Over the last 10 months or so, I've talked about the problem of expiring CBT certificates on a number of occasions. But the other legal document that has a restricted life is the theory test certificate. And just as motorcyclists have been facing the end of their CBTs duration, there are plenty of learner drivers and riders out there who took a theory test and have found it's now either expiring or about to expire before they can actually get a test. Because, as you probably know, both the theory test and the practical test have to be passed within 2 years of each other. The trouble is, of course, with the driving test itself totally disrupted, there are a number of drivers and learner riders who hold a valid theory test certificate, which has either now expired or is about to expire. So there have been plenty of calls to extend the life of these theory test certificates. But Roads Minister Baroness Veer has repeatedly said that the government has no such plans. And she reiterated that in a statement earlier this week. And she said, "I do appreciate the effect of the current situation on learner drivers and approved driving instructors, ADIs. But we have considered this matter carefully, and our conclusion remains that extending the validity of theory test pass certificates would be an unacceptable risk to road safety. Those with theory test certificates expiring will have taken their test in early 2019. Since then, their lessons and practice sessions have been significantly curtailed, and it's therefore likely that their knowledge base and hazard perception skills will have diminished. This will clearly have a negative impact on the road safety of new drivers, who are also already disproportionately represented in casualty statistics." It had been proposed that driving instructors could confirm that their trainees' theory test knowledge remained sound, but Baroness Veer dismissed that too. Although ADIs are well qualified and proficient in driving instructions, she said, they are not experienced assessors. And she went on to say, "This is evidenced by the current practical test pass rate of 47%. The implication is obviously that driving instructors don't know when a candidate is test ready. And I'm sure that particular statement will already have put a lot of driving instructors' noses out of joint." Okay, now on the other hand, it does seem that the DVSA are finally starting to plan ahead, only 10 months into the pandemic. It's just been stated that the DVSA will respond to requests for practical driving tests from organisations on behalf of frontline mobile emergency workers who require a driving licence to carry out duties in their employment role. So don't get your hopes too high, but that doesn't include people who are commuting to get into to work, I assume. The announcement continues, "This is a limited service subject to examiner resource and is restricted to candidates working in health and social care and other public bodies involved in work responding to threats to life, such as the Environment Agency's flood rescue staff or local authority grit truck drivers. And it's good to know that we're now almost into February and DVSA is finally thinking about gritter truck drivers. And you won't be able to put yourself forward for a test either. The request will have to come from your employer. The DVSA will contact NHS trusts to explain how to nominate candidates. Candidates cannot apply themselves. Applications from other organisations will be considered if the mobile emergency worker criteria is met. Is met for criteria? It's a plural now. Okay, so that doesn't mean all instructors can return to work either. Approved driving instructors and trainers can return to work only for the purpose of supporting a mobile worker with a booked test. So in other words, there's nothing there about the expiring CBT issue. Right, okay. Don't forget, if you want to catch up with the show at another date, we are out on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. And you can always head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK, or you'll get somebody showing you how to light a fire with 2 sticks. And catch up with the old shows over there, as well as here on Facebook. Keith Wheeler has popped in and he says ADIs do know when candidates are ready for their tests, but they're under huge pressure from candidates and parents to get the test done as app to save money, which, Keith, I would thoroughly agree with. If you could go on ad infinitum to guarantee that your candidate was not just test ready, but guaranteed to pass the test, but the bill to the trainee would be outrageous. So yes, I agree that candidates are put in when they have a fighting chance of passing the test, but can still do something daft. Having spent 12 or 13 years training bike riders, and I know just how daft people can do things when they're under test pressure. Right, okay, so next little story, and this was quite an interesting one because it may not immediately seem particularly relevant, but as I've said before, one of the problems with the rapid development of e-bikes generally is demarcation. What actually is an e-bicycle and what's an e-motorbike? Now, it may not seem a particularly important question, although Simon Cowell may be thinking otherwise. You'll recall that back in the summer, he pulled an inadvertent wheelie on his new electric bicycle and broke his back. What caught him out was, although the thing was described as an electric bicycle and it looked like an electric bicycle, it actually had the power of a small motorcycle, hence the uncontrolled wheelie. He's currently suing the manufacturers, but the problem really lies with the lack of clarity in terms of the sort of construction and use of these things. The development of electrically propelled personal mobility solutions has pretty much caught legislators on the hop. I mean, it's easy enough to define the difference between a pedal power cycle and a moped with a petrol engine. What's not so easy to define is the difference between a pedal powered two-wheeler with an electric motor and a non-pedal powered electric powered two-wheeler. Think about e-scooters. Where do they sit on the line of mobility solutions? And the problem is that rules often differ depending on where you are in the world. So, for instance, in the UK and Europe, it's legal to have an electric motor giving you pedal assist. So, in other words, you have to pedal the bicycle to get the electric motor to give you some powered assistance to your legs. But in other places, there are bicycles with a sort of twist grip design, which basically goes straight off the throttle and you don't have to pedal at all. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And it was a bicycle of the latter kind that Simon Cowell fell off. And legally in the UK and Europe, they're not an e-bike. But as I say, they look like bicycles, and in other places, they are sold as e-bikes. So whilst we have rules about what can be used on the road here in the UK and Europe, the rules for off-road racing are also evolving. But for private off-road use, or for use on your California drive, of course, pretty much anything goes. But this could all be set to change after a case in the court in Paris. What it was a dispute between the FFM, which is the French Motorcycle Federation, and the FFC, which is the French Cycling Federation. And the case was all about certain trademarks related to e-bikes and e-bike racing, which had been registered by the Motorcycle Federation, obviously taking the view that anything that's powered is a motorcycle. But those trademarks were claimed by the Cycling Federation on the grounds that they were using pedal bikes with an electric assist in their regulations. So what's happened basically is that the court found in favour of the Cycling Federation, and the Motorcycle Federation has actually had to relinquish ownership of more than 20 trademarks, which related to these sort of electrically assisted bicycle races. A number of others were cancelled entirely. So the result might just have broader implications. It might help set out the ownership of race events in France, but it could, on a broader note, help determine exactly where the line between electrically assisted and electrically powered two-wheelers lies, and then it'll be easier to split these things into the domain of cycling or motorcycling. Right, okay, on with the next item. Now, biking skills 101. I do like to try to get a sort of better biking tip in at least once a week on these items, and what I want to talk about today is the collision that happens between vehicles and motorcycles. Now, we've known about this for a very, very long time. The problem with a motorcycle is it is around 1/3 of the width of a car. Oops, I've just dropped my demo motorcycle on the floor. Here it is. Survived the impact. So as we can see, it's got a very narrow frontal view. A motorcycle is typically around 1/3 of the width of a car, and it can easily be hidden by what are known as vision blockers, and particularly on busy city streets, of course. There may be other vehicles blocking the driver's view, particularly if the motorcycle rider is filtering or moving alongside parked vehicles, but you can also vanish behind a tree. Telephone boxes, people standing on the street corner, all of those can cause significant vision problems for a driver, and motorcyclists have to be aware when they are concealed behind one of these vision blockers. But one of the problems that's become critical in the last few years is the structure of the car itself. Just have a look at this particular picture. Scroll on. There we have a 1961 Voxel Cresta. What you'll note if you look at that car is how thin the pillars supporting the roof actually are. And notice how you've not only got the wraparound windscreen there, which gives you a pretty good view from the driver's seat of what's approaching at an angle to the vehicle, not just out of the windscreen, but you've also got a pretty good view if you turn your head and look through the other angles. There's relatively little in the way of roof, which is actually blocking the driver's view. Now, compare that with this. It's a 50-year later vehicle. It's a current model Range Rover Sport. And what you'll notice is that the view through the vehicle is much, much reduced, not just because of blacked out windows, which may do wonderful things for the sun, keeping the interior of the vehicle cool, but don't do much for your vision out of the vehicle, but also the width of the pillars themselves that are holding up the roof. Now, this has been put in place obviously for rollover crashes and to give the structural safety cage within the vehicle that protects the occupants a lot of integrity. And the result is that modern cars are much, much safer than things like the old Voxel Cresta in a crash. It's not just the seat belts, it's also that the car doesn't deform around you. But the result is what is sometimes called beam blindness. The framework supporting the windscreen, particularly at the front, the A pillars, are significantly thicker on modern vehicles. Now, here's a way that you can test this for yourself. Just go and have a look in your own car. The ones in my partner's Skoda are actually about the size of my palm. And what that means is that it's really, really very, very easy indeed to hide a motorcycle behind it. So just pop outside wherever your bike is, in the garage or on the driveway or whatever, and just put your hand up in front of you about an arm's length away. What you'll find is if it's about an arm's length to the end of your hand, you're actually sitting about the right distance from the pillar in your car, and then walk up to your motorcycle whilst looking along the line of your palm and see how close you can get to your bike before you can see the bike emerge around your own hand. You should be quite horrified just how close you can get. It is surprisingly close. So the problem is that if the driver looks in our direction and the A pillar is in the way, the driver may not know we're there. So now it's the angles that are important. Think about the angle of a car. If the driver is looking directly out of his windscreen and the bike is coming towards him from the opposite direction, then you should be able to see that motorcycle, unless there's a vehicle in the way, which is one of the problems of right turning vehicles cutting across the path of a motorcycle. One of the crashes I've talked about. But generally speaking, we have a fairly clear view out of the windscreen. We also have a fairly clear view directly out of the side windows. So as long as something is approaching at 90 degrees, we should be able to see it. We just have to turn our head left or right. Although, of course, if we have a passenger sitting in the passenger seat, they could be blocking the view. We may have to lean forward to see around them. And now we're looking through a smaller gap. But what if the vehicle is actually at something of an angle? Now, think about the approach to a lot of roads. What you're encouraged to do when you're turning left, for example, is actually to follow the line of the curb. And what that means is you're looking back over your shoulder. So it may be the pillar which is behind your head, holding the door up, which is blocking your view. At other junctions, you may end up slightly pointed to the right, and now it's the A pillar which again comes into play because it's blocking the view between you and the motorcycle. Now, what if both vehicles are moving? Now, something that's known to nautical types and pilots comes into play. It's something called the constant bearing problem. Now, here's what happens. Brief description. If two vehicles are on a collision course, then there is no movement relative to the background. Remember, I've talked in the past about lateral movement being the thing that helps people pick up the fact that there is a vehicle there. But if we're simply on a collision course, then all that happens is we get gradually bigger. There's none of that lateral movement to help anybody identify us. So that's bad enough. But think about what happens if you've got that A pillar blocking your view beside your head and the motorcycle happens to be behind it. If the speeds are right and if the angles are right, then the motorcycle stays behind the A pillar all the way up to the point of collision. It's been determined that this is a particular problem with bicycles as well at certain junctions, that drivers simply never ever spot the bicycle because it is constantly in the blind spot created by the A pillar. Well, it will certainly be the same problem with a motorcycle. And this seems to be an explanation for collisions at some crossroads where drivers approach them and treat them as a giveaway junction. So they slow down, have a look, can't see anything, and then accelerate across. And then they find that there's a bicycle or even a motorcycle in the blind spot, and it's been there all the time. But it also explains collisions at roundabouts. Now, some time ago, somebody posted up a video of a collision that they actually had on a roundabout. And what you could see when you looked at it closely was that the angle that the bike came into the roundabout at and the angle that the car came in at the next junction meant that the driver's line of sight was blocked all the way through by his A pillar alongside his head. The motorcycle stayed behind the A pillar all the way through the run up. The driver or the rider of the bike could clearly see the car, and he obviously thought that he was equally visible, and it never occurred to him that there might be this constant bearing problem and beam blindness. So what can we do about it? Well, like any collision, we don't actually have to ride into it. A big plus of riding a motorcycle is that we do have a much better view, generally speaking, than the driver. You have the ability to see out of your visor. There's very little in the way of blind spots created by the average helmet, a little bit to either side perhaps, but all you have to do is turn your head and you have sort of 180-degree vision quite easily, and you can even look behind you over your shoulders. You should be looking over your shoulders. So we can get a far better view of the world by looking out of our helmet than the driver ever can from looking out of a car. Yes, you can say they should be aware of the blind spot problem, look around it, but as I say, we see what we see. We tend to forget what we can't see. So from the motorcycle's perspective, look at the car, work out the driver's likely line of sight. First off, if you cannot actually see the bit of the car that the driver is sitting in, then there's absolutely no way that the driver can see you. A lot of sort of near misses and collisions happen at blind exits from side turnings, blind driveways, etc. There was a fantastic video posted by one of the road safety organisations up in East Anglia some years ago, where one of their riders had taken some evasive action when a van nosed out of a blind driveway. The van driver simply couldn't see until he'd put a couple of a metre or two of van into the road first, and the rider hadn't predicted that and had to take some evasive action. But as I say, also think about the A-pillar problem. Look to see where the driver is sitting in the car. If the driver is behind the pillar, then assume that they can't see you, and then do something proactive about it. We don't want to be made mincemeat by collisions in this case. So what can we do about it? Well, fairly obviously, we can slow down, we can change position, we can sound the horn, and we can finally be ready to take some evasive action, maybe braking hard or swerving. To say that too many riders fail to take these fairly simple precautions and get caught out isn't blaming the rider, as some people have said, but it's no good simply repeating the tired old complaint, the drivers don't look properly. We've been saying that for 100 years, and that hasn't solved the problem yet. Right, so that brings me almost to the end of today's webcast. Before I shut down, a couple of things I want to remind you about. First of all, I am locked down, not shut down. That means I do have online coaching available. You can pop over to my website and have a look at the site, and that will give you an idea of what I can do. Or you can drop me a line. That's fine. I'm also available to deliver presentations to groups and clubs. Drop me a line if you're interested there. You can also catch up with my ever-growing collection of 60-second safety videos, which are over on my YouTube channel as well as Facebook, where they are premiered. You can pick up the older ones here. I'll just get you the that's the wrong button. There we go. That's the link to my YouTube channel. As I say, don't forget that all-important UK on the end of it. I'm still producing my regular Skills on Saturday and Tips on Tuesday series and on Facebook. And if you find it difficult to keep up with the Facebook activities, you can sign up for the newsletter. Plenty of people are doing that. And that will go out on Fridays. And basically, that'll give you a link back to the Facebook articles. So you'll get those delivered to your email address, and then you can follow them across easily enough. Paul has said he'll have to watch later as he's just involved in a web meeting, and Nigel is also on catch up as he's just tuned in just in time to catch the end of it. So yeah, good to see you guys. A couple of other things. Don't forget the Facebook archives. You can access those for the cost of a coffee. 300 better biking articles on coffee.com. 214 to 216 are all up. I'm just making a start with 2017. And all the old shows from Elevenses are also available here on Facebook, on my YouTube channel, or on Coffee. So that's it for today. Stay safe out there. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Hope I'll see you back on my next Elevenses on Sunday. But for now, it's goodbye from Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. Thanks for tuning in.